Creative Babble.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Why? Why would you take the life of somebody so vibrant and a young mother? I can't comprehend it.
On November 26, 1979, Evelyn Day disappeared. She was a student at Ames Community College, an hour outside of Denver. Evelyn was last seen locking up the doors to the lab. The next morning, her station wagon was found parked under a water tower. She was raped and strangled with a belt. It was 1979, almost a decade before DNA was ever used as evidence in a criminal trial. Despite all that, investigators swabbed Evelyn's body as well as under her fingernails. That evidence sat on a shelf for almost 40 years.
We'd probably given up and figured it would never be solved.
Jennifer Kerr, Evelyn's cousin, felt hopeless. What are the chances that a cold case from 1979 will ever get solved? But then she received this news.
The coldest of cold cases in Weld County might finally be solved. It has been more than 40 years since the death of Evelyn K. Day. And now Weld County says they have arrested this suspect in that murder.
The suspect's name is James Herman Dye.
To get that phone call, just the reality of it was like, wow.
This just kind of came out of nowhere, and it does feel like a victory.
And this was only possible because the Weld County Sheriff's Office created a cold case detective position. Detective Byron Castellan ran the DNA evidence collected when they found Evelyn Day's body. And within months, he got a hit. James Dye, the suspect, denied having anything to do with the murder. However, his criminal record was hard to ignore. James Dye was previously arrested 4 times for sexual assault. One of those arrests, he was accused of sexually assaulting a woman after she picked him up and gave him a ride home. DNA. It's the ultimate proof of guilt or innocence. Unlike any other forensic technique, such as fingerprints, eyewitness testimony, bite mark analysis, DNA seems ironclad. The technology revolutionized criminal investigations, enabling prosecutors to secure convictions, and on the flip side, has exonerated the wrongfully accused. But is DNA evidence as reliable as we think it is? This past November, James Dye is a free man. Despite the DNA evidence used to convict him, he was released from prison, and the 2 counts of first-degree murder, of rape, and strangulation of Evelyn K. Day were dropped. How could this happen? Well, it turns out that the key DNA evidence in the case was compromised, and more than 1,000 cases just like his in Colorado could be thrown out. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else.
Get me Will Trent, ABC Tonight.
I don't even know where he is.
Will Trent is back.
You thought you could hide forever? Time to come home.
The series that's being called one of the best network procedurals.
We're going to solve this case.
Featuring new cast member Gina Rodriguez.
I'm a prosecutor. We deal in truth and facts.
Maybe everybody should try that, huh?
Will Trent, the 2-part season premiere, begins tonight on ABC and stream on Hulu.
So, what went wrong in the case against James Dye? Police had DNA from the rape kit, he had a match in the database. Why would the prosecution just drop the charges on this 40-year-old cold case? And on top of that, let the convicted killer and rapist loose? It turns out that the answer is a little complicated. Yvonne Missy Woods was a senior forensic scientist at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, where she worked for nearly 30 years. Some of Missy Woods' previous cases included the rape trial of Kobe Bryant and other high-profile Colorado cases. But now she's being investigated for cooking the books, so to speak. Missy Woods is not being accused of fabricating DNA results, basically the reporting of results without actually testing it. That, by the way, is called dry labbing. Instead, Missy Woods was working and analyzing real DNA samples, but it appears that she was omitting key data. This is Dan Crane, a forensic scientist and professor, talking about this in the Hidden Killers podcast.
In at least 652 cases, she had taken out of the file for the case controls that didn't meet her expectations. So a negative control, for instance, that showed a result, or a reagent blank that showed a DNA profile, or a positive control that failed to show the DNA profile of just the reference sample that's put in to show that the whole test kit is working.
Let me explain. When DNA labs run tests, they usually use 3 controls to ensure accurate and reliable results: a negative control, a reagent blank, and a positive control. Think of these controls like steps in a recipe to make sure everything is working as it should. The negative control is like checking your mixing bowl before baking. It shouldn't have any unexpected ingredients in it. The reagent blank is like testing your sugar to make sure that it's actually pure sugar and hasn't been contaminated with salt or flour. The positive control is like baking a test cookie to make sure that your oven's working properly and that the ingredients are good. Like I said, Missy Woods is not accused of framing suspects with fake DNA. No, it's believed that she edited and deleted data to make it appear as if no contamination ever occurred. So to go back to our cooking analogy, it's like finding dirt in your sugar, but instead of reporting it, you erase the data saying that the sugar is clean, or adding clean sugar to the test spoon to hide the dirt. This type of tampering of data is considered lazy, unprofessional, irresponsible, and can have a huge effect on every case Missy Woods has ever been involved with for the last 29 years. More than 1,000 cases will have to be re-examined because of this. Now every single DNA sample that she handled will have to be retested, and one of those cases was the people of the state of Colorado versus Garrett Coughlin.
Start Denver 7 at 10 with breaking news. We have uncovered new details about the man now charged with murdering 3 people in Boulder County. Investigators caught 24-year-old Garrett Coughlin in Lakewood.
In April 2017, Garrett Coughlin was charged with killing 3 people just outside Boulder, Colorado.
My brother Wallace White, Lance, he went by his middle name, and my other brother, Lee, and my sister-in-law, Kelly.
This is Kathy Eppler. She instantly lost a big part of her family that day. Her 2 brother and sister-in-law were brutally murdered.
And we were kind of an uber close family, very, very much so. We ran a garage door company together for a very long time. I worked in their home daily for years and years. I mean, everybody spoke to each other almost every day.
The suspected gunman, Garrett Coughlin, was a family friend battling addiction.
Garrett was Kelly's godson from one of her best friends since 3rd grade. So Garrett had been in and out of our lives forever, his whole life. And Lance pushed him to get into a trade, get into a real job, that kind of thing. Had tried to help him with money and encourage him forward.
And what do you think could have driven him to...
Oh, greed and ego. Greed and ego and, addiction, of course. But I mean, if you really wanted to rob them, you could have done it when nobody was home. 5 days before they were at my daughter's wedding. that was my last time with my family as we were at my youngest wedding.
Yeah. Is that the picture that was used in the article? Or?
Yes.
DNA evidence became the cornerstone of the investigation, tying Coughlin to the crime scene. Little did Kathy Eppler know that the DNA evidence would be the thing that would eventually set him free. Yvonne Missy Woods, the senior forensic scientist who handled the case, is now accused of manipulating and deleting the data in Coughlin's case. An internal investigation revealed traces of another man's DNA on the murder weapon, evidence that was either ignored or deliberately removed from the records. As the prosecutors prepared for a second trial in the Coughlin case, their case just crumbled. Eventually, Garrett Coughlin was offered a plea deal that reduced charges from first-degree murder to second-degree. And on top of that, Coughlin's sentence was reduced, and he'll be available for parole in 24 years. How does it make you feel to know that the Garrett could get out in 24 years?
Heartbroken, angry. I'm totally devastated. I walk away with any faith out of our justice system now whatsoever. I mean, 24 years for 3 lives, and it was premeditated as heck.
Yeah, it's terrible, and all because of a technicality.
Yeah, and because of the way people are running their job and have been allowed to do it.
That's right. Missy Woods was suspected of misconduct years before this internal affairs investigation officially began. Colleagues had raised repeated concerns about Woods' work, including suspicions of data deletion, manipulation, and irregularities with her DNA testing procedures. Yet, despite these warnings, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation failed to investigate any of these allegations, and the concerns were either dismissed or not addressed at all, allowing Woods to continue working on these critical cases.
Cutting corners and pushing it out to make her numbers and her quota, and they knew about it. They knew about it for an extensive amount of time and really did nothing to correct it. That's what offends me the most, and the fact that there are so many people that are going to have their hearts broken all over again.
It wasn't until an intern discovered anomalies in her casework during a routine quality control review that the issue was escalated. And the intern's findings triggered the official internal affairs investigation that ultimately uncovered the botched results of the Garrett Coughlin case, but also every case that Missy Woods has been involved in. This is just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yes, very much. We were the first case out of Missy Woods' stuff to come up to trial and have him be affected by what she's done.
It's staggering, right? To think that, like you said, it could be 600 cases, it could be 800 cases, it could be even more the longer they look into this.
And she had 29 years on the job.
Yeah, and to think that all those cases could be re-examined, reopened. Some of these people who have committed crime could be
innocent.
Yeah, or released, or their sentences shortened. I mean, even if they did commit the crime, you know?
Very much so. And people having to face possible retrials, having their worst nightmares where the boogeyman is real, and having to go back to court on it and watch this person get off free on technicality stuff.
The last 6 weeks of my life has been the longest 6 weeks of my life because I don't sleep. And I'm consumed with this.
That audio is from a 2023 interview with investigators after the intern found problems with her work. The investigators told her that they, quote, are trying to determine how bad of a problem this is for us, unquote. Oh, it's a big problem. They confronted her about deleting and manipulating the data in her reporting. This is what she had to say.
Do you ever remember doing that?
I don't have an independent recollection of that, no.
For over an hour, Missy Woods repeated the same claim. I don't remember. She repeated that she has no memory of these mistakes, but when investigators asked her how this could have happened, she said,
"Why would you do that?"
I think it burned out.
How did you feel about what you were doing? Did you feel bad about it? Did you feel, or did you wrap your mind?
I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about it until 5 weeks ago.
But at this point, if this stays the way it is, your legacy is more than likely to have tarnished us and you.
So what repercussions did Missy Woods face? Did she get disciplined? Did she get fired? Nope. She was allowed to resign. It's clear that her reputation and credibility as a forensic analyst is irreparably damaged. But it's not clear whether she'll face any criminal charges for her misconduct. Here's Kathy Eppler again.
There's nothing. There's nothing there for us. There's no apology from her. And you figure even her as a human being, there's been no apology. They forget how deep and how many lives each one of those tests affects.
Yeah.
I'm just heartbroken. The people that should never see public again that are going to get released, children that were raped or hurt that are going to have to face their monsters again and have them released. It's appalling.
And it's not just the fear of having guilty people released or have their sentence shortened. Kathy Eppler says that people forget the toll that these criminal trials take on the victims' families.
We had our grief process hijacked pretty good with the way this went down. But we're on the end stage now. At least we're no longer constantly going to court. I'm no longer losing jobs because I have to go, oh, wait a minute, that kind of thing.
When we return from the break, we're going to flip the script. We just talked about how sloppy DNA analysis can set possibly guilty criminals free. Well, what happens when DNA is used to incarcerate an innocent man?
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today. Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
In our first segment, we talked about the mishandling of DNA evidence by a veteran DNA analyst, Missy Woods. At first, I thought the Colorado scandal was an isolated incident. But as I started looking into this, it turns out this kind of sloppy DNA analysis is much more pervasive than I realized. Our next case takes us to Houston, Texas. And for that, I'm calling a friend.
I'm Celisia Stanton, and I am the creator and host of Truer Crime Podcast.
While researching this case, I stumbled upon Celisia Stanton's episode on Josiah Sutton. Josiah Sutton was just 16 years old when he was arrested and charged with sexual assault in Houston, Texas. The case against him hinged almost entirely on DNA evidence processed by the Houston Crime Lab. At first glance, the science seems irrefutable. The results presented as undeniable proof of guilt. But what the jury didn't know was that the DNA analysis was flawed. As you recall this case, this took place on October 25th, 1998. And there was a 41-year-old woman. She was in a parking lot of her apartment complex when she was approached by two men with a gun.
Yeah, she was abducted at gunpoint by these two men. And she reports that they took turns actually sexually assaulting her in the backseat of an SUV. After that attack, they abandoned her in a remote area, and she immediately decides to report the crime. They're able to do a rape kit and take some semen samples from the car and take all that in as evidence. she tells police some fact things about the men who had abducted her, that they were two young Black men, that they're about 5'7" in height and weighed maybe about like 135 pounds. Specifically, she remembered that one of them was wearing a skull cap and the other one had on this sideways baseball cap. So about 5 days after that assault, she actually sees 3 young men walking nearby her apartment. And she identifies 2 of those men and thinks, 2 of these guys are the men that kidnapped me. And those 2 men end up being Josiah Sutton and Gregory Adams.
It was just something like she saw these guys.
Yep.
It almost had like this flashback, like, oh my God, could these be the guys? But their appearance, even though the headgear was spot on, they had a sideways cap and the other one had a skull cap. There was something discrepancy between what she recalled her attackers looking like and what these young men looked like.
Yeah, and specifically Josiah Sutton, he was pretty tall. He was over 6 feet tall, whereas she remembered her attacker being shorter and he was over 200 pounds. Mm-hmm. So he just was a lot taller and heavier than the person that she had initially described.
Celisia was able to talk with Carol Beatty, Josiah Sutton's mother.
By the time I got the call that the neighbors had told my other kids that Josiah had been arrested and he was at the police station, he had no idea what he was there for. None of them, they said an assault, but they were thinking a fight because Josiah had previously had a fight in our complex from a bully that was picking on him. So he was thinking that was the reason that he was there. I remember the first time that I saw him in jail behind the glass. And I said, baby, don't you ever admit to anything that they tried to convince you to. He said, oh no, mama, my mind is made up. I didn't do it. I know I didn't do it. And I'm not.
On paper, it seems like an open and shut case, right? The police had the DNA. They collected the semen from the car seats where the assault occurred. They had the rape kit.
Yeah. So basically they had all these, they had a bunch of DNA samples, but this is sort of like, I guess, like a mess of findings, right? Because it's a ton of different DNA from different people, some from her. There's 2 attackers, right? But, when they test some of that DNA, they're actually able to exclude Gregory, which was the person that was walking with Josiah that she had identified. And so Gregory is like, they're like, he's not a match and he's kind of just let go. Whereas Josiah, they're like, no, his DNA is a match. It is extremely likely that his DNA matches up to the DNA samples that they had found.
Chrissy Kim, a DNA analyst with the Houston Crime Lab, assured the jury that no 2 people have the same DNA except for identical twins, and that Josiah Sutton's DNA was found in everything she tested. The semen on the car seats, the vaginal swab from the rape kit, even on the victim's jeans. So the prosecutors had all they needed. They have a victim IDing the suspect, they have the DNA match, linking Josiah directly to the attacks. It was a slam dunk case. Josiah Sutton was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Essentially how it works with DNA is like, all of us share 99.9% of our DNA is the same. That 0.01% of DNA that differs between all of us, that's what they're really comparing. So when she, as the analyst, is looking at that little sliver of DNA, she's basically comparing the sample that they got from Josiah to the samples they have from the crime scene. And she's comparing them at a bunch of specific points to see if they match up.
Forensic DNA analysis uses statistical calculations to estimate the likelihood that a DNA profile from a crime scene matches a specific individual. This involves determining the probability that a random person from the general population would have the same combination of genetic markers. So these statistics are just basically providing a measure of how significant this DNA match is and contextualizes that with the strength of the evidence in a criminal investigation.
And so when it came to Josiah, she said, it's a match. It's definitely a match. They very much overemphasized the likelihood that it could have been somebody else whose DNA might have been similar. So she says that the DNA type of Josiah is expected to occur in 1 out of 694,000 individuals, which means the likelihood that Josiah is just by chance matching up to this DNA is extremely low. And that kind of puts the idea into the jury's mind, just like anybody who kind of hears DNA evidence, that, of course, this is foolproof. What are the chances that she gets that one person.
Yeah. Who's going to question this? I mean, Christy Kim, she is obviously an expert in her field. She's worked at the Houston Police Department Crime Lab for 17 years. She has a degree in biology. I mean, like, no one in that court is questioning her credentials or her expertise, right?
Exactly.
Josiah's case just seemed hopeless, right? It just seemed like he just, was found guilty despite this, insurmountable evidence, right? But on November 2002, everything changed, right? Like this case, which seemed like it was closed, no hope for him, completely turned on its head.
Yeah. So basically what happened was a local news station in Houston had done this sort of like deep dive investigation into the crime lab, and they had found just an obscene number of errors. And that was a segment that Josiah's mom, Carol Beatty, had been watching. They hadn't specifically looked into Josiah's case, but it sort of had highlighted to her, like, there were issues. There was a possibility that maybe, they would be able to free her son.
And she sprung to action, right? His mom just took that and ran with it.
I remember when I talked to her, she basically said that she had jumped up. She'd never been so excited about something. So she ends up emailing the local news outlet and kind of telling them about Josiah's case and asks, figures out like maybe she can get Josiah's records sent over to them for them to look at.
Sutton's lawyer had bad news on his test results.
You say, well, your DNA is positive. And I was like, how possible? Ain't no way. It's impossible.
So a jury found Josiah Sutton guilty and sentenced him to 25 years. But Sutton still insists.
Something's wrong.
And now it turns out he may be right.
They decided to send Josiah's records then to a criminologist that they had been working with, who's named William Thompson. And then William Thompson was going to give an independent review.
As I look over the test results in a case like this, I think this is ridiculous.
Remember when the DNA analyst Christy Kim testified at trial that Josiah Sutton's DNA was a 1 in 694,000 match with the rapist? Well, it turns out that Thompson's report concluded that Josiah's DNA wasn't even found in the police samples.
The quality of the work here in this lab is just grossly inadequate. I think that we have a clear miscarriage of justice here.
Christy Kim ran tests on 3 separate DNA samples from the victims, but the resulting profiles were different, which is a big problem because if she can't get a consistent result from the victim, then how can she accurately analyze a more complex mixture in the rape kit?
And every single one of those 3 times, she comes back with a different type for the victim, which is impossible. You got 1. So that automatically should have been a major red flag for her work.
If a technician can't reliably get consistent results from a single person, the victim, how can they accurately interpret a complex mixture with potentially multiple suspects? It turns out that DNA matching is a lot more subjective than we were led to believe. We're really talking about probability and statistics here, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than the smoking gun that everyone thinks DNA is.
And DNA analysts know this. This is why they talk about when they testify, when they're doing their research, when they're writing, their papers and doing their studies, it's always written as a probability. What is the probability that this person's sample matches the DNA found? It is never a slam dunk, but based on sort of popular media and how we've kind of understood DNA in our culture, that's not our understanding.
And you point out in your piece that just the fact that there is DNA evidence could be enough for somebody to take a guilty plea just because they feel like, hey, how am I going to defend myself against DNA evidence when in culture and in our society, we think it is a slam dunk when really there's a lot more gray area, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think in general, most cases end in a plea bargain. Most folks plea out and that's in a case where there is DNA or isn't DNA. So if you have DNA evidence that's being held against you, it doesn't matter if you think you're innocent, right? Because you're also up against a system that will prosecute you based on the evidence presented. And if you're in front of a jury of your peers, I'm saying that in quotes, I guess, if you're in front of a jury, then that all of that sort of like cultural understanding really does play into their perception.
What ended up happening with Christy Kim, the DNA analyst who was working this case for Houston Police Department?
Yeah, so once the other reporters at the local news outlet had kind of looked into the case, they also were kind of diving into the background of the crime lab and the people that were working there. And they actually found that nobody who worked at that DNA lab, so not just Christy Kim, but none of the analysts had the proper education that they needed to do their job. Only one of those analysts had even completed like the necessary math and science courses. We're talking also just kind of some of the basic classes, statistics, genetics, biochem, biology, like super foundational stuff. They also found that there wasn't any sort of like testing methods to ensure that any of these analysts had actually mastered these skills. And for Christy Kim in particular, she had never even taken a statistics class, which is, again, highly disturbing in a field which relies so heavily on statistics. And when they were like analyzing her work in particular, they found a ton of statistical mistakes. And even the person who was leading the crime lab, the founder of the crime lab, lacked expertise. One of the former DNA supervisors, after failing his proficiency exam and getting suspended for mismanagement, was actually promoted to head of quality control. Not only was it that the individual analysts didn't have the proper education, but the people who were leading up to the lab, who were supposed to be kind of like steering the direction of the ship, were not making any moves to improve the accuracy of the findings that was coming out of the crime lab.
And ultimately, the crime lab was forced to close, right? And undergo this review.
Yeah, yep. There was a whole investigation into it. They had to shut down, and they were also reviewing all these cases to figure out, look, like, are there other cases like Josiah's, like the sort of like, are any of these errors that we've found, did they actually lead to wrongful convictions?
Time is a tricky concept to swallow. Because of this faulty DNA evidence, it took a jury only 2 hours to reach a verdict, and a 25-year sentence for a crime Josiah Sutton didn't commit. His life as we knew it was over. Just like that. Here's Carol Beatty, Josiah's mom again.
In some way, me and my family was in prison. We didn't celebrate Christmas. We didn't celebrate holidays. I always had this thing to take family portraits with my kids. We didn't do that because it was always a missing piece.
In prison, Josiah Sutton earned his GED and turned to his faith. Luckily, the investigative news piece into the Houston PD crime lab aired when it did. Josiah's mom happened to be watching that night. Otherwise, Josiah Sutton would still be in prison today. 4.5 years into his sentence, Josiah Sutton was finally released from prison, but his conviction stayed. It wasn't until a year after leaving prison that Texas Governor Rick Perry granted his pardon. And what did the state of Texas give Josiah for this miscarriage of justice? $118,000. That's $26,000 for every year he lost. Life after prison was tough. Josiah's mom said that he still has a tough time maintaining relationships, even with his own family.
And his kids are older now, and they're getting angry because they have not established a relationship with him as of today.
And he has trouble finding a job, not because he doesn't want to work, but because most places won't hire him.
Josiah does not work because most places will not hire him because the arrest record is still there.
I want to thank Celisia Stanton with the Truer Crime podcast for her help on this episode. If you're interested in learning more about Josiah Sutton's case, check out her episode about him. She goes into much more detail that just didn't make it into this episode. Before working on today's show, I would have never considered DNA junk science. From my lack of understanding, it seemed like the ultimate barometer of truth. But now, it doesn't seem so clear. I don't know if I could go as far as putting DNA in the same category as witching rods or psychics in an investigation. It's still a pretty powerful tool. But it's only powerful because we, as a society, believe it is. And in the wrong hands, it's clear it can destroy lives. When forensic scientists cut corners, they could potentially let guilty people walk free. And who pays the price for that? Well, the victim's family? knowing that the person who destroyed their lives is just out there, or having to relitigate their criminal cases all over again, which takes a tremendous toll on them. On the flip side, sloppy DNA work can lead to convictions of innocent people like Josiah Sutton. We talked about 2 different cases today. 2 different DNA analysts, Missy Woods in Colorado and Christy Kim with the Houston PD Crime Lab. Their stories prove that manipulating DNA work has the potential to destroy lives. So next time you hear a case hang solely on DNA evidence, take that with a grain of salt. Defense lawyers, do your own independent testing. Law enforcement agencies, make sure you have the proper oversight to make sure that the people doing this type of work are properly trained and aren't overloaded with too much work. I know it's easier said than done, but at least we all know the pressures at hand and we can make better decisions when a prosecutor is waving DNA evidence in our face. Today's episode was written by me, Javier Leyva, and edited by the talented Puneet Shenoy with the Podcast Pundits. That's it for this week. We'll talk again real soon.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Creative Babble.